Recording in progress.
Commissioner Dandekar,
Here.
Commissioner Hopkins, he's absent. Commissioner Khan,
Here.
Commissioner Wilkin,
Here.
Vice Chair Quincy,
Here.
Chair Jorgensen.
Here. Good. So thank you. Let the record reflect that commissioners are present through teleconferencing. I'd like to remind my fellow commissioners and staff to help us reduce background noise by muting your phone or microphone unless you are speaking. And an example of why that's important is I'm going to recite the Pledge of Allegiance by myself so we don't have echoes that make it awkward. So do we have a flag that we can pledge to?
One moment, thank you.
Good. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So now we'll move to the item public comment for items that are not on the agenda. And there's instructions on the screen for the public to use to make a comment at this time. Deputy City Clerk, do we have any public comment?
We have no public comment at this time.
Okay, then we move to the consent agenda, and that's going to be consideration of the September 22nd minutes. Are there edits or concerns or anything, or are we ready to move approval? There were a lot of changes we made, so I assume people have had a chance to read it closely. Changes we made in the original staff recommendation.
I'll move approval of the minutes.
I'll second.
So Commissioner Wilkin moves the minutes, and the second was Nick.
Yes, that was me.
Yes, good. Vice Chair Quincy. So Deputy City Clerk, let's have a roll call vote.
Commissioner Khan, oh, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
Commissioner Wilkin,
Yes.
Vice Chair Quincy,
Yes.
Commissioner Dandekar,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes. So the minutes are approved. And now we're going on to item 4, which is the one and only public hearing tonight. And I want to read that any court challenge to the action taken on public hearing items on this agenda may be limited to considering only those issues raised at the public hearing or in written correspondence delivered to the city of San Luis Obispo at or prior to the public hearing. If you wish to speak, please give your name and address for the record, and please limit your comments to 3 minutes. The public speaking portion will come up in a couple of minutes after the staff report. So this item is a review of proposed amendments to the municipal code, and we have a recommendation to send a resolution to the city council for it. So could we have the staff report? Is that Owen Good who's going to make the staff report?
Actually, I'm going to go ahead and give the interview. Thank you, Chair Jorgensen.
Good.
And members of the commission. Can you see
Thank
my
you,
screen
Commissioner.
okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so yes, I am joining Owen Good this evening. This zoning regulations update has been a team effort. I'm Teresa McClish. I'm the Housing Policy and Programs Manager for the city. But as you will note by the agenda report, we're touching several sections of the zoning regulations tonight. And so I do want to acknowledge a great team effort by community development staff, and several of us are here this evening to kind of help us review the proposed amendments. So the task before you, the recommendation is to adopt a resolution recommending that the city council introduce and adopt an ordinance amending titles 6 and 17 of the municipal code with changes implemented from the adoption of the 6th cycle housing element, the updated county airport land use plan, and some general corrections identified and executed by internal staff. And this is with an exemption, proposed exemption for from environmental review in accordance with the California Environmental Quality Act. So these are generally considered what we call cleanup amendments. We review our zoning ordinance from time to time to make sure that they're reflective of current state law, they're implementing our general plan, and they're procedurally effective for our community. And so this year's review, things fell in pretty much within 3 areas, 3 general areas. One, the first one we'll go over is consistency with the recently updated San Luis Obispo County Airport Land Use Update. Secondly, there's some amendments that are direct implementation of our recently adopted general plan amendment for our housing element. And then thirdly are just miscellaneous amendments that we have been keeping track of for the last 18 months or so since the last overhaul of the zoning ordinance in 2018. So moving first to the amendments for consistency with the 2021 San Luis Obispo County Airport Land Use Plan update. This was at the end of May of this year. And we have about 6 months to implement or ensure that our zoning ordinance is consistent with their updated airport land use plan. And so there's not a whole lot of change. Projects within the airport influence area are required to be consistent with the airport land use plan. We have a map here that we're going to embed in our zoning ordinance. We are repealing the airport overlay zone regulations. This allows us to remove a chapter that is no longer necessary with the update. And we have some text in the zoning regulations that's just specify that you are required to be consistent with the updated land use plan, airport land use plan. And then just a note that the various specific plans that touch this airport influence area, this wide yellow circle on the map, remain in effect. So there were no changes or updates needed to regarding the specific plan areas. And moving on to housing element related zoning amendments. We have our adopted housing element, 6th cycle housing element that was in November of last year. And it was just recently certified by the state in September last month. It requires several updates that are to be implemented by the zoning ordinance for consistency with state law. Some of these updates are going to be a bigger effort. You've recently reviewed and recommended for approval the objective design standards. They're now going to council. Next up will be our inclusionary housing ordinance. That will be coming to you soon. These are bigger and broader efforts. But tonight's amendments really directly implement marching orders that are in our housing element programs and required by state law. And so I'll go over a few of these with you this evening. First is regarding program 5.5. This is allowing mixed use development within service commercial and manufacturing zones without a use permit. And we're supposed to do this within 1 year, and we are. So this requires us to modify table 2.1. This is a big long table that describes uses allowed by zone. And it notes that we no longer require use permit for in these areas. I will note that any mixed-use project are still processed according to the tiers of development review, and they're still subject to development zoning code requirements. There's no longer a need for a use permit. Program 6.23, this is involving streamlining. So we're supposed to eliminate or reduce the number of public hearings required for housing projects within 1 year of adoption of the housing element. So this is reflected in changes to section 17.106.030. And you'll note here that the tiers in terms of number of units have changed or being proposed to be changed. So where a minor review currently is less than 3 units, it's now less than 10 units. Moderate, it's a change from up to 10 units to up to 49 units. And a major project is a change from the current 11 or more and to 50 or more. And these tiers and these levels of review have been reviewed with staff from the California Department of Housing and Community Development in the certification process of our housing element. And there was lots of discussion about our tiers being too low and our need to elevate those for streamlining purposes. And these are the levels of review that were agreed on with staff at the HCD. And finally, program 8.18, this is use by right. So we are to amend our zoning element within 1 year to ensure compliance with the Supportive Housing Streamlining Act. This is Assembly Bill 2162, allowing supportive housing use by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are permitted. And Assembly Bill 101, which is to allow low barrier navigation centers by right in all residential zones, areas zoned for mixed uses, and non-residential zones permitting multifamily uses. And this is also reflected in table 2-1. There's one more housing element program that we're directly implementing, and that is concerning employee housing, the Employee Housing Act. And this again is touching table 2.1 to allow employee and farm worker housing by right in open space and conservation and agricultural zones with specified number of beds and certain requirements. And it also involves removing a chapter 17.148. And this is because this occupancy is regulated by the in another section of the state code. I hear that dog. And so moving on to other changes that have been noted to be needed by staff as they're processing applications. And you have seen fairly recently changes to our ordinance in Title 17 pertaining to accessory dwelling units and junior accessory dwelling units. So some of these changes are noted before you, quite a few text changes. And I'm going to go back one, because there we go. To simplify language, to modify language to be in compliance with ever-evolving state law, guidance from the Housing and Community Development Department at the state, and previous council direction. And also, as noted, to reduce the number of exceptions that are continually required by applications coming in for height exceptions. And so the language before you in your gender report and the attached proposed ordinance are generally addressing these three reasons. There are a few text changes that we would like to review quickly with you this evening. And these were precipitated by additional staff discussion after publication of the report and in response to Planning Commissioner questions we've received in advance of the hearing. And so one of those is a proposed text change to the proposed ordinance you have in your packet, and concerning specific requirements and standards for accessory dwelling units. And this is just a text change that was determined by staff to provide better clarification. And so we're just proposing to strike out this last section, this last sentence, portion of a sentence in this section, so that when you're talking about accessory dwelling units and where they're allowed for structures that contain both commercial and residential uses that are not considered residential structures, and that's it, period. And that was determined by staff for better clarification in context with the other section changes. Secondly, in reference to junior accessory dwelling units, it was brought to our attention that we had some conflicting language between subsections. And so the language before you is proposed to be modified this evening from your ordinance to strike out the last sentence of this subsection. This is concerning junior accessory dwelling units and where they're allowed. And it is proposed to, again, strike out the section that has to do with being allowed on a lot with an accessory dwelling unit because it's addressed elsewhere in the code. And the last proposed change we're suggesting, in response to some questions we've heard already since publication of the packet, concerns guest quarters. And these changes are really getting at whether or not there's direct access to living space in the primary residence, such as a kitchen. It's really the kitchen facilities that are precipitating a lot of questions concerning guest quarters. And so we have proposed to address this in your current packet, but there's some additional wording that we would suggest, and it's up for discussion, to make it just really clear that we're really talking about kitchens in this particular definition. And I'm happy to come back to these definitions once we conclude the presentation, and if you have any further questions. And so beyond that, we have a list of corrections and clarifications for you in your agenda report. These fall within, many fall within changes to Table 2-1 in Section 1710.020. There's also several that have to do with cross references and clarifications to parking standards, but no substantive changes. There is some removal of a duplicative table relating to the review authority that is proposed to be removed. And then the rest can't be categorized. They're just several other cleanup items that have been, again, identified by staff as we've been engaging the public in processing applications for the last 18 months since the last overhaul of the zoning amendment, zoning update. And then one other thing, and this is not concerning Title 17. This is generally not in your purview. It's in Title 6. But it is a cleanup item that has been requested. There's been some concern and conversation regarding the keeping of bees. And so we are proposing to take care of that within this ordinance. And essentially, we have very strict provisions for the keeping of bees, and it's only essentially allowed for the purpose of study or observation within a school building. This proposed modification does allow this beekeeping for agricultural purposes within conservation open space or the agricultural zoning district. And this is, of course, recognizing the importance of honeybees for pollination. And again, as I mentioned, we're using what's referred to as the common sense exemption for these amendments, as they will have no possibility of a significant effect on the environment. So that's the provision allowed in the California Environmental Quality Act for projects that come forward where you can just clearly see they're not going to have a possible impact. And so that's the CEQA clearance for this proposed amendment this evening. And with that, and with the suggested changes by staff, the recommendation is to adopt a resolution recommending the proposed ordinance for City Council. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. We have Owen Good here as well as some other staff. So I may be throwing it to some other people depending on the topic. And that will conclude the presentation.
Good. Thank you, Teresa. Very, very helpful. So do we have questions of Teresa or other staff who would like to begin?
I have a quick question. A number of these, especially with the ADU fine tuning, I assume that as we look at SB 9, everything then gets put back into the hopper. I mean, is that going to substantially negate all of these changes we're making?
Well, SB 9 is recently signed by the governor. It's a bill by Atkins to essentially address missing middle housing for the state. And we are reviewing what those requirements may mean for the city of San Luis Obispo. As you know, missing middle housing is a policy program in our housing element. So we have been working on missing middle housing regulations to bring before you. This will change, our approach as the state has taken the reins on missing middle housing, and we will need to make sure we bring forward an ordinance that complies with state law and balances our needs as a community, and we will be working on that. But I couldn't say necessarily the extent of those changes. But certainly it will be an ordinance on its own. We will need some community engagement and some discussion about how best to implement SB 9 for missing middle housing for the city of San Luis Obispo.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I
I have a couple of questions, Mr. Chair.
Good. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, thank you. My first question is about the levels of development review that are being revised. And this is section 65 in the resolution. It's on packet page 63. And what I was kind of curious about is the fact that since we now have up to 10 units being allowed as a minor development review, so without a public hearing, I still saw this reference to remodels under the moderate category. So it seemed a little bit inconsistent to me to be able to have a remodel of a building be moderate and require a public hearing, but building up to 10 units being minor with no public hearing. So I was wondering if that was intended and what the rationale was. Just seemed a little incongruous to me to have that remodel require a public hearing when you can do all these new units without a public hearing.
Right, yes, and that is a really good question, and certainly there's ways we could probably address a remodel question, but really I think this drives at the impetus to streamline housing projects. So that number of units is really, we're just clearing the path and making it easier for housing developments to go forward, and not changing necessarily the size of maybe a commercial project or something that would still remain at the current level of review. And I think that's generally it. But certainly if the commission feels that, it's not right or not fair, then we can talk about that. However, I would be very careful about reducing the level of review for the number of dwelling units, because we really are trying to make it easier for housing development specifically to go forward.
Okay, well, thank you. I was just wondering, is there any reason why a remodel, whether it's minor or major, should just go into the minor category and not require a hearing?
Yeah, I think there's just a lot of unknowns about that types of remodels, and we could do that. We could change that percentage, for example, but at this time, staff's just suggesting it like this, and we can revisit later if it's just not making sense.
Okay, all right. I had one other question. I was curious about this one, having to do with the definition of vacation rentals. And this is section 103 in the resolution. It's on agenda packet page 74. And under the definition of vacation rentals, we're now proposing to include RVs. And I was wondering what the reason for that was. Actually, I didn't even know that an RV could be used as a dwelling, as a permanent dwelling. So maybe you could explain that. Why are we adding RVs to the definition of vacation rental?
And I would invite Mr. Bell to address that question. Thank you, Kyle.
All right, Kyle.
Thank you, Teresa. This is Kyle Bell, Associate Planner with the City of San Luis Obispo. I'm happy to answer that question. This amendment came from our Code Enforcement Division. There's a provision under our zoning regulations where you're allowed to stay in your RV for up to 7 days on a property. And we found that people were doing Airbnbs out of that the recreational vehicle on their property under that provision. So this cleans up that inconsistency to communicate that an RV on a property is only intended for residential dwelling and not for commercial use, and so up to 7 days at a time, other than the tiny house ordinance. So that was our intent with that cleanup item, and hopefully that addresses your question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions of staff? Let me toss one in to keep us moving here. On page 47 of our packet, I'm assuming we can all kind of move through electronically. I didn't quite get there. Something about historic resources. We've got underlined language, so I didn't know if that meant this is all new. But item G on page 47 says that accessory dwelling units on listed historic properties in historic districts shall be found consistent with historic preservation ordinance and Secretary of Interior standards. Is that saying existing accessory dwelling units, not a new one that would be added or built at a later date?
And I'm taking a while to get to that packet, that section, but I would suggest that this applies to new projects coming forward.
So does that mean that a new project for an accessory dwelling unit automatically would be found consistent regardless of its design, regardless of its massing, regardless of anything related to the structure that earned the historic recognition. So it could be out of keeping with it. I'm just trying to understand what the language is telling us there.
Sure, and I see both Kyles up for this
Yeah,
one.
both
so
Kyles are up. Let's pick another Kyle.
let them fight for it while I look for that section. Thank you.
All right, Kyle, I'll let you go ahead and start, and then I will jump in if necessary.
Sure. For ADUs, we do still have some ability to require certain design and compatibility with structures, even non-historic ones. This one just clearly states that we do want any ADUs that are on historic properties to be consistent with historic preservation guidelines and SOI standards. It doesn't mean that we would necessarily pull that aside for any sort of discretionary review, but it does give us the end game would be we could deny a project if it was clearly not compatible with those standards. So that needs to be stated so that people who do have a property with a historic structure don't think they can build a modern ADU on the side of it. Just make that statement to be clear.
I see. Well, just reading it at first blush, it doesn't look like you have any leeway. It just says they shall be found consistent, but I'll assume
it's a tricky language. One of my conversations with the State Housing and Community Development Department asked about that, and the word found makes it sound like we would have some sort of discretionary review, and there's just not another great word for it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we would not have another discretionary review. We would make some sort of other statement in terms of its compatibility.
So,
Yeah, and if I could just add to that real quick, just to be clear, to be inconsistent with the Secretary of Interior standards and the Housing Preservation Ordinance would mean an environmental impact to historic resource, which falls under CEQA thresholds. So that's really the intent of this language, is to kind of clarify to applicants that there are thresholds that the ADU is subject to make sure that you're not in violation of separate ordinances. And so that's why we're adding this language to kind of bring it all together and clarify that.
I see. So another way to say it is that they'll be found consistent upon approval, or upon approval will be found consistent. Maybe that's what you're saying. I see. Well, I can see the problem. Okay, I'll leave it at that. Any other questions of staff? God, Nick may owe us big time here. Then I think we're ready for public comment. Let's move to that. And this is a chance for members of the public to comment on this recommendation and the staff report. And so are there any public comments that have come for this item, or is there anyone raising their hand virtually? Deputy City Clerk Christian?
We have no public comment at this time.
We assume that the instructions are clear enough that if someone wants to comment that they know what to do at this point?
Yeah, I'm afraid there's nobody in the attendee queue.
Okay. Well, let's get the motion up here so we can discuss it. Somebody move the motion.
I'll make a motion. I move to adopt the draft resolution attachment 1, recommending the City Council introduce and adopt an ordinance, attachment 2, amending the City of San Luis Obispo Municipal Code, Title 6, Animals, and Title 17, Zoning Regulations, updating regulations for beekeeping, state housing law consistency, and other various zoning regulations as required for internal consistency. I did that all off the top of my head.
I'll second the motion.
You should be a lawyer.
I'll second the motion.
Commissioner Khan, Commissioner Khan's second, is that correct?
That was Commissioner Wilkin.
Commissioner Wilkin, good, sorry.
Yeah. And I do have some proposed changes.
Good, why don't you jump in?
Okay, I'll do it
And
right
we'll at least
now.
know that the second likes the changes, and we'll find out about
Right.
that.
Right. Okay. First of all, I just wanted to commend staff on quite a bit of legislative work here and putting all these changes together. I know from personal experience that it's quite a task. And so I appreciate that and appreciate the answers to the questions from staff. And I do support the changes that staff included tonight in the presentation having to do with the location of ADUs or junior ADUs, the statement about mixed use ADUs and mixed use development, and also the clarification on guest quarters. I think it's still a little vague to me, but it's a lot better than it was originally, clarifying about the access to the kitchen. So I support those three changes, and I support the other changes in the ordinance. I think most of them are necessary. Most of them are cleanups and reasonable. There are a couple things that I think I would like to propose changing. And the first one is section 25, and this is on agenda packet page 38, and has to do with mixed use projects. And essentially what this is a new section that's proposed to be added. What it does is it allows commercial uses in a mixed use project to operate until 10 o'clock instead of 8 o'clock, which is the current requirement. In order to go past 8 o'clock right now, an exception, I think, or a minor use permit has to be required. And I disagree with this. I don't think it should be an automatic that the commercial use gets to go till 10 o'clock by right. The Planning Commission has dealt with noise issues and incompatibility issues on several projects that I can recall, and they've been controversial with proposed late closings of commercial when you have residential above or next to or in the vicinity. So I think there are incompatibility issues and that need to be looked at depending on the kind of commercial use we're talking about, the live entertainment, what's involved, and where the residential uses are. So I would propose that we keep the regulations as they are and require some sort of an exception or discretionary review to go beyond 8 o'clock. I would say an exception. I would suggest we leave the language as is or require some kind of an exception to go past 8 o'clock. I don't think it should be automatic to go to 10. So that's my first change. And the second one has to do with accessory dwelling units. And this is in section 45, and it's agenda packet page 47. And there's some new language that staff has proposed that limits balconies on accessory dwelling units to 50 square feet in size. And I can see the rationale when the balcony is adjacent to an existing residence or facing an existing residence, but I don't see a problem with a larger balcony if the balcony is oriented to the interior of the property or facing a street. So I would suggest that we revise this language. I can give you the section number. It's 17.86.020. It's B3D7. I don't know if staff would be able to put that up on the screen so everybody could see it. But what I would, in plain words, what I would propose is that we allow balconies greater than 50 feet if they are oriented to the interior of the lot or a street. Oh, okay, great. Staff has highlighted the area. So let's see. Towards the bottom where it says an accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed an aggregate area of 50 square feet. I would just add unless oriented to the interior of the lot or a street. So that is my proposed change. So in other words, you could have a balcony larger than 50 square feet if it's oriented to the street or the interior of the property. And so those are my two recommended changes. And I would ask the motion maker if he is agreeable with those or agrees with those changes.
I do agree with those changes, so I will amend my motion to incorporate Commissioner Wolkin's changes.
All right, thank you.
A discussion about those amendments, and we'll go back to discuss the thing as a whole. Ema, it looks like you're about to say something.
I too was struck by the balcony issue, and I was wondering if there was a reason why staff came up with this. Is there a history of why these issues have come up and staff has recommended this condition?
Oh, with every change, there was many conversations. So I'm going to invite Kyle Van Leeuwen to give us the background on this one.
Sure. So the way the ordinance currently is written, we have a height limit of 16 feet, and we allow for ADUs higher than that. Very popular to have an ADU above a new garage these days for whatever reason. And we, through the exception process, look at possible impacts to solar exposure and privacy to neighbors. And typically, if they're meeting additional setback standards for the upper stories, and that is addressed. We have seen a few that I will say had extra large balconies. I've also seen an ADU that kind of used their ability to build an ADU to create a roof deck or a large balcony for the main house. So there's a couple of examples of slightly intrusive balconies and outdoor spaces that were created in connection to ADU creation. Our ability to critique ADUs is limited, so we did feel that controlling the size of a balcony usually reduces the likelihood of, say, a large party being on the balcony, or possibility for privacy impacts to a neighbor.
Interesting. Okay, well, let me, while we're thinking, I can smell the straw. Let me ask staff a question about the 10 p.m. versus 8 p.m. I mean, it seems that the general rules of noise for everything ends up being 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. Those are anything after that, or anything other than that is certainly subject for complaint, and we kind of know about that. So what's the, I'd like to hear from staff what the issue would be. If I can see the issues if it's 8 o'clock, because we face that here on the commission, and it's really awkward. Certainly 10 p.m. must mean, let's say for a restaurant, that I would hope it would mean that the restaurant has closed early enough so that its outdoor activities and noise generation is beyond the set limits, is complete by 10 o'clock, is finished. Is that, I mean, is that part of the presumption of moving this to 10 p.m.?
And I'll invite Kyle Bell to give you the reasoning behind this proposed change. And I think that might help clarify things. Kyle.
All right, thank you so much, Teresa. I actually do remember those projects that Commissioner Wolkin was mentioning that was subject to this section. Some of the direction we received from council was to revisit this section to see to match the closure time with our noise ordinance, which is 10 p.m. as well. So the intent was to be consistent with quiet time hours throughout the city at 10 p.m. The commission is more than welcome to consider this and provide their input. This was just direction we had received, and so we were incorporating it and following through.
Comments?
Yeah, I have a comment.
Hours. Go ahead.
So I understand the argument about consistency with the noise element, but what the noise element says actually is that the noise threshold changes at 10 o'clock. So the noise limits are quieter after 10. In other words, noise element doesn't say that commercial uses can automatically go to 10, or it doesn't say anything about operation of commercial uses. It just says that the noise limits become quieter from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. Than they are during the day. So I still think that we could allow case by case restaurants and other uses to go beyond 8. I think they just need to be looked at on an individual case by case basis and not automatically get the 10 o'clock closing time by right. Because I think there are compatibility issues, there are neighbor issues. We've seen them at the Planning Commission, and I think they should be looked at on case by case. Maybe not by the Planning Commission, but by the Planning Department or Planning Director through some exception process. So that's my pitch on that one.
It seems like we're, I don't know, in some ways kind of undermining what we mean by mixed use serving a small neighborhood or a small set of units or something like that. Because this would also apply to any kind of convenience store or anything else that might be open that, might be meeting neighbors' needs. But there's a tug and pull here. I can see that. Interesting problem. It's just, I think, a question of how far up it's got to go, or whether staff would lose its ability to shape this at all if it just automatically says 10 p.m. I can certainly see where the council is coming from, though. Other comments?
It seems like most of the times when we've had requests to extend the time, we've extended to 9 o'clock and said, staff should review after a year to see if there are any issues. So it gave some leverage for staff if things weren't going well, or put some pressure that neighbors' concerns were, there was some recourse for neighbors' concerns about noise. So that's one thing. I mean, I think we may be taking away some opportunity for staff to have a say. On the other hand, you know that when you buy into a mixed-use property, you're kind of buying into a mixed-use property, and you're buying next to commercial and so on. So maybe this just clarifies, if you buy into a mixed use, be ready that there may be activity till 10 o'clock at night that is may not be conducive to residential occupations. So, I mean, I think there are both ways to look at it. I wonder how staff, what's the staff's experience been with all these cases where we've really put the burden on you and said, watch it for the next year and come back to us if it doesn't work.
It has been effective in the cases that I've worked on. Most issues have actually been resolved since once the appeals and entitlements are settled, and so we haven't actually received any follow-up complaints. In some sort of situations we have where we were able to clear them up pretty quickly, and so they weren't substantiated complaints, and they don't seem to be repeating themselves either. So it seems to be pretty effective.
And the antecedent of what you're saying is an 8 o'clock, a 9 o'clock hour, but you're not saying 10 o'clock.
I think
right,
we've
Kyle?
been going up to 9 o'clock, haven't we, mostly? With the
if I remember correctly, back under the 2015 zoning regulations, I believe the original cutoff time was 6 p.m. for mixed use project. I'm trying to find that clause for myself right now. And I think under the 2018 zoning regulations, we increased it from 6 to 8. And then when we were reviewing the most recent appeal regarding some concerns related to this subject, the council was looking to for us to consider consistency with the times for the noise ordinance. So expecting quiet hours after 10 p.m. So but Commissioner Wolkin is correct that that was not the intention. Isn't to all of a sudden be in compliance with noise ordinance. It's simply to just maintain consistency throughout the regulations. But if you give me a quick second, I'm going to look up 2015 zoning regulations and see if I can find out what that threshold was.
So while Kyle is looking, I mean, after having heard this, I think I would support Commissioner Wilkins' position that we not change to 10 across the board. I think there may be another process that needs to be put in place so that it doesn't come to Planning Commission necessarily. Perhaps it's the director's discretion or whatever language to that effect, but not change it unilaterally to 10.
How strongly do you feel, all of you feel about 8 p.m. as opposed to say 9 p.m.?
So what you're saying is that 9 p.m. would be automatic. If they wanted to go to 10, it'd be a director's decision.
Be an exception of some kind.
Yeah, I could hear that. I just want to voice that I kind of agree. As we more and more commingle uses inside this city, it seems to be a trend. It is good to consider the effects of those uses on other people, like noise. One concern I'd have on the opposite side of that is that could 2 people complain about some noise when 100 people are affected and kill the whole thing? So you'd probably want someone to consider it. But I could support 9 o'clock would be automatic until 10 o'clock would be approved by the director.
I'll just say I like the 9 o'clock, maybe for selfish reasons. I don't know how it happens, but somehow, especially in the summer, we're out doing something, hiking or something, and come back into town, and it's very close to 8 o'clock, and it's surprising how few things are open after 8 for eating. You'd think everything would be open, and right, even downtown, a lot of things are closing down, the kitchen's closing down, and it's disappointing that there aren't more things open till 9, frankly. So maybe I'll go back to Commissioner Wilkin and ask whether he can accept an amendment to the amendment.
Well, I still like 8 o'clock, but I'd like to hear what others say, what the motion maker thinks, actually. Commissioner Quincy.
I'm not really partial one way or the other. I think it's not that we're killing a business from going till 10. It's just that they need to seek another level of review. So I could go either way. I'm not really. I don't feel really strongly one way or the other.
And are you speaking about the hour that we would choose if it's not 10 o'clock? Because it sounds like the commission's kind of moved away from 10 o'clock at this point.
Correct. Yeah, I don't feel real strongly whether it's 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm. Well, should we have a straw vote, or is it worth it? Or Commissioner Wilkin, what do you think?
I think I would be okay with 9 if that's what the commission wants to do. But I would prefer 8, but if the commission is leaning towards going past 8, then I'd settle for 9.
One of the things that concerns me to changing it to 9 is, in a sense, I always worry about sort of us making decisions that here that may have unintended consequences and, that staff have to deal with. So I'm sort of inclined to status quo, to stay with the 8, but not all that strongly, just because I worry about sort of consequences that of moving to 9.
It's too bad we don't allow half votes. We could have 2.5 versus 2.5. There's possibilities here. Or we could just make it 8:29 or something like that.
Sounds good. 8:30.
Well,
Yeah, I mean, how does one choose? What's the right time? Which is why I'm sort of resisting making any change whatsoever, too.
yeah, well, hopefully most of the time the person proposing the establishment will be in tune with what the neighbors would like and what would work best and what would be a good business proposition. But who knows what that means when it sometimes doesn't play out that way. Well,
The council could change it too, right? The ultimate vote is up to them, correct?
Yeah.
So if they feel really strongly about it, they could always.
I think if we stay with the 8, we sort of support staff's leeway and jurisdiction, and then a council could overrule us.
I'd say we stay with 8.
I tend to agree too.
okay, let's do it. Have we got everything else straight? Are we ready to vote? I think we had 2 new proposed amendments from Commissioner Wilkin.
And we had 3 from staff.
And we had 3 from staff. And so I think what I'm hearing is we're good on all of them with the 8 o'clock and the, well, let's see. On the balcony, you had language that certainly made sense. Essentially, I think your language was 50 square feet may make sense against another house as part of trying to make for better neighbors, but otherwise it may not be critical to do that. It might open things up.
Does staff have the
yeah.
language?
The issue was around, are you creating a party site? Because we assume all of the balconies are built structurally so that they're not going to collapse. But
what I'm hearing from staff is that they've been go-arounds using, not having a definition, a defined space size. And this is their effort to preempt that in terms of creating outdoor space under the guise of ADU open space, but really space that can be used as a party space. So Commissioner Wilkin, with deference, I would suggest we just stay with the existing language, because after hearing staff, I thought maybe they're in the trenches about what comes through, and people are very skillful about utilizing these rules for ends that really may not be great for the neighborhood.
I gotta agree. Other comments?
Oh, Commissioner Chair Jorgensen, I just wanted to ask staff if they had the language that I suggested, or maybe if they could put it on the screen so everybody could see. Okay, great, thank you. So language in red is what I'm proposing.
Could we enlarge that some more? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, well, let's at least ask for staff comments on that. I'll start with Kyle Bell, because it looks like he's sitting on maybe a 5x10 balcony. No, not really.
I'm trying to pull up my screen so that I can see as well.
You lost your background with a.
Oh, would you rather look at the picture?
Yeah, sorry about that.
Owen, would you mind zooming in for me so that I can see it a little bit better? And could you clarify the question for me one more time?
The question is whether this language that Commissioner Wilkin has suggested should be added to the resolution.
Yeah, I believe this is an effective, creative change that would be consistent with the intent of this section. This would preserve the ability to provide open space with the interior of the lots, while at the same time protecting the privacy of neighbors. So I don't think staff has any concerns related to the added language, and happy to see it.
Okay. Well, are we ready to vote then? I think we are.
Mhm.
We're at 8 o'clock. That is, it's not 8 o'clock here. It's 8 o'clock for those businesses that need to close then unless they file an exception and win it. And we've got a little more discretion with the balconies. And we have the 3 earlier staff suggested changes. So Kevin, can you call the roll? I think we're ready to vote on this.
Vice Chair Quincy,
Yes.
Commissioner Wolkin,
Yes.
Commissioner Dandekar,
Yes.
Commissioner Khan,
Yes.
Chair Jorgensen.
Yes. So it passes unanimously. Thank you for that. And maybe we can excuse Nick and he can catch up later on planning projects if need be. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
So that's the next item, which is an update on upcoming the forecast for the agenda.
All right. Well, thanks,
Very cool.
Chair and Commissioners. Kind of looking at the forecast as we look out to our October 27th meeting. We do have 2 items on that agenda. The first one is a review of the Agricultural Heritage and Learning Center that's a part of the San Luis Ranch specific plan. That's coming to you from a recommendation from the Architecture Review Commission. And then the second item we're going to be looking at is the Bullock Ranch development, and that's the 192 unit housing development in the Orchid Area Specific Plan located at 3580 Bullock Lane. And that is also coming to you from a recommendation that happened previously from the Architecture Review Commission. That one's, staff's been working with the applicant on that one on clarifying some conditions over the past several months. And so it's now ready for your review. Looking forward to November, we have 1 meeting in November on the 17th, and we have currently 2 items on that agenda. First one is the 600 tank farm project, and this is the project where Planning Commission reviewed the draft EIR, received some information surrounding kind of the concept of that project, and you'll be looking at the full package of all the entitlements along with the final EIR at that meeting. And that includes, just for reference, about 280 residential units and 12,500 square feet of commercial mixed use. The other item on the agenda for the 17th is a mixed use project. It's 3-story building with 20 residential units and about 7,800 square feet of commercial space. And that is located at 2800 Broad. That is also coming to the commission with a recommendation from the Architecture Review Commission. And then finally, looking out to our final meeting of the year, which is December 8th, we just have 1 item on the agenda, but it is a decent sized project. It's the expansion of the residential care facility that's located at 55 Broad Street. That's the Villages. And it's going to include 2 new 3-story structures that would accommodate 59 new rooms. And so that would be coming to you, again, recommendation from the Architecture Review Commission on December 8th. And that will take us through the rest of the calendar year.
Thank you. Boy, what a year it's been.
Yeah, it's been big, and it's not slowing down yet, but a lot of accomplishments. I just forwarded that quarterly report, Chair, to the city clerk that I sent to you earlier. Good. And kind of looking at that, there was a lot of big things on that agenda in terms of accomplishments and things coming forward as well.
Yeah. Maybe we should share it with the commissioners just so everybody can recall how much fun it's been. And your hair is graying a little bit, Tyler, but it's not white.
It is.
You've done well to get through this year, I'll say. Okay, well, I think we're good.
I had a question for Tyler. Are we going to find somebody to fill Commissioner Sorensen's, Schwarzman's position on Planning Commission? Or are we going to wait till April and fill all of them that become vacant?
My sense is that we would definitely be trying to fill it now, but I would ask Kevin to see if he can speak to that a little bit. The clerk's office is the department that would be going out and providing that announcement and coordination on the recruitment.
Sure. Thanks for the question. Absolutely. We've actually opened up the recruitment, kind of a soft opening. I have an announcement to go out into our city news by the end of the, hopefully by the end of the week or beginning of next week. We have a number of other recruitments that we're currently conducting as well. So we're going to kind of try to push that forward. If you all know, this is a blatant plug. If you know of anybody that might be interested in serving on the Cultural Heritage Commission, we've been having a challenging time getting all the seats filled for that. And then we're also looking for members, a Jack House committee member, specifically somebody who is Cal Poly faculty or ex-faculty with horticultural expertise. So anyway, when we send that out, we will be looking for new applications for the Planning Commission because we don't have any left in the hopper from the last go around earlier this year. And definitely, as Tyler said, ideally we would try to get somebody before the regular recruitment, because although the irregular recruitment kind of launches off next month, it doesn't actually end and really come to full fruition until March of next year, and that's a long time to be down a member on your commission for sure. So put the word out yourselves as well. I will be, like I said, I'll be sending out the city news thing, and that'll have a link to our jobs page, but it is currently open on our jobs page. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you all. I think we can adjourn.
Have a good night, everybody.
All right.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.